The axiom of conquest was simple: take the young. Throughout 14 galaxies and across 11,000 subjugated worlds, the Meverans had never encountered a failure. Their methodology was elegant, efficient, and psychologically devastating. The formula had been mathematically proven to be perfect by their strategic algorithms. High Commander Zoreth stood on the observation deck of the flagship, inevitable, his 6 appendages clasped in formal posture as he gazed at the blue-green planet below, Earth. The humans called it, a quaint name for what would soon be acquisition target. "Deploy the nursery vessels," Zoreth ordered, voice emotionless. Lieutenant Kovacs hesitated. "Commander, the preliminary scout reports indicate some anomalies in human psychological profiles." Zoreth's primary eyes narrowed while his secondary set remained fixed on the planet. "Elaborate." "The humans display unusual attachment behaviors toward their offspring. The neural patterns show intensity levels outside our standard measurement parameters." "Irrelevant," Zoreth dismissed with a casual gesture. "All species cherish their young. That is precisely why our strategy succeeds. The mathematics is irrefutable. The Meveran conquest philosophy had been refined over 8,000 years. It required minimal military expenditure and guaranteed planetary compliance with negligible resistance. Rather than deploying destructive force, the Meverans would quietly extract 10% of a planet's juvenile population. The procedure was conducted simultaneously across all major population centers. The strategy exploited a universal biological principle: organisms would sacrifice themselves for their progeny. When faced with the choice between resistance and the safety of their offspring, the leadership of every species inevitably chose submission. "Prepare the memory suppressors and behavioral modification protocols," Zoreth commanded. "Standard procedures will begin integration of the human young into our educational systems immediately following extraction." Lieutenant Kovacs's skin flushed with indicators of concern. The scout team recommended additional study of human parental responses. Their protective instincts appeared. "We have conquered 11,000 worlds, Lieutenant," Zoreth interrupted. "From hive minds to individualistic organisms, from silicon-based life to plasma entities. The axiom of conquest has never failed." Zoreth turned his attention to the holographic display where thousands of small, silver discs were being launched from the fleet. The nursery vessels would touch down simultaneously in all major human settlements, bypassing their primitive defensive systems through phase-shifting technology. "Our calculations predict total submission within 4.3 hours of first extraction," the ship's AI announced. "Probability of success, 90. Zoreth smiled. The 0.02% uncertainty was merely a mathematical formality, a concession to the theoretical possibility of random quantum events. In reality, the axiom of conquest was perfect. 2 decks below, Science Officer Nalara reviewed the human data for the 3rd time, her unease growing. "The neural scans must be incorrect," she muttered, comparing them with the baseline responses from other conquered species. Where other species showed attachment to their young as a strong biological imperative, the human brain's scans showed something different, something that resembled a neurochemical storm. The attachment wasn't just biological, it appeared almost weaponized. She scrolled through historical records from the human datanet they had intercepted. Stories, myths, and historical accounts across all their cultures shared a disturbing pattern. Humans who had performed seemingly impossible feats when their offspring were threatened. Maternal and paternal figures, lifting crushing weights, fighting overwhelming odds, sacrificing themselves in ways that defied rational self-preservation. Nalara pulled up the scout team's final recommendation again. "Further study required. Standard methodologies may produce unpredictable outcomes." She should report this directly to Zoreth, but the extraction had already begun. The nursery vessels were already entering Earth's atmosphere. In suburban Chicago, Mark Foster awakened to the sound of his daughter Emma's scream. It wasn't a normal scream, not the kind from a nightmare or a stubbed toe. This was primal, cut short, terrified. He was on his feet before his conscious mind registered movement, his wife Sarah already sprinting down the hall. The door to 6-year-old Emma's room was open, emitting an unnatural silver light. Sarah reached it first. Her body froze in the doorway. Mark arrived a half-second later, nearly colliding with her. Over her shoulder he saw the hovering silver disc in their daughter's room. Emma was suspended in a beam of light, floating toward an opening in the ceiling. "Emma!" Sarah screamed, lunging forward. Mark moved without thinking, hurling himself toward his daughter, hands outstretched to grab her ankle, which was just inches from his fingertips. Across the planet, identical scenes unfolded in millions of homes. Children suspended in beams of light, parents witnessing the impossible. The calculated perfection of the Mevaran strategy playing out exactly as planned. On the inevitable, Zorath received the first transmission from a nursery vessel. The extraction had begun flawlessly. He allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. First wave of acquisitions proceeding at 99.7% efficiency, the ship's AI reported. Minor anomalies detected in parental response patterns, but within acceptable parameters. Excellent, Zorath replied. Prepare the submission address to their world leaders. On his display, he watched as the first groups of human children materialized in the fleet's holding chambers, confused and frightened but unharmed. The behavioral modification would begin immediately, erasing memories of their previous lives and conditioning them to serve as perfect cultural ambassadors for the eventual integration of humanity into the Mevaran collective. Lieutenant Calvex approached, his posture reflecting concern. "Commander, we're detecting unusual energy readings from the planet's surface. Specified weapons deployment?" Zorath asked, unconcerned. "No, sir. The energy signatures are biological in origin." Zorath frowned. "Impossible. The readings are centered on the extraction points, amplifying rapidly." At that moment, the first emergency signal flashed from a nursery vessel in a place called Melbourne, Australia, then another from Tokyo, then São Paulo, then Moscow. Calvex's voice trembled. "Sir, we're losing contact with the nursery vessels." "Impossible," Zorath repeated, a flicker of uncertainty entering his voice for the first time in his 3-century career. "The axiom is perfect." Science Officer Nalara burst onto the bridge, clutching her datapad. "Commander, you need to see this. The humans, they're not responding according to any known behavioral pattern." On the main view screen, footage from a nursery vessel in New York showed a human female, small even by their species standards, tearing through the reinforced hull with her bare hands, her face contorted in an expression that no Mevaran algorithm could classify. Behind her came others, dozens, then hundreds of humans, their bodies radiating impossible energy readings, moving with speed and strength that defied their biological limitations. "What is happening?" Zorath demanded, genuine fear in his voice for the first time. Lalara's voice was barely a whisper as she replied, "They call it parental instinct. But we were wrong about what that means to them." On the screen, the nursery vessel's feed cut to static as it was overwhelmed. The mathematics had failed. The perfect strategy was collapsing. And across Earth, millions of parents were coming for their children. "Impossible" was a word that had no place in Mevaran vocabulary. Until now. Commander Zorath stared at the cascading emergency signals flooding the command center displays. Red indicators pulsed across the 3-dimensional map of Earth, each representing a failing nursery vessel. The pattern defied all probability algorithms. "Status report," he demanded, his secondary eyes dilating with stress. Lieutenant Calvex's voice wavered. 73% of nursery vessels report critical breaches. 38% have gone completely silent. "How?" Zorath hissed. "Their technology is primitive. Our vessels are impenetrable to their weapons." Science Officer Nalara pushed forward her datapad displaying frantic energy readings. "They're not using weapons, Commander. They're using themselves." The main view screen cycled through surveillance feeds from around the planet. In New York, a human male had torn through reinforced metaplast with his bare hands. In Tokyo, a female had withstood direct contact with a neural disruptor that should have incapacitated any biological entity. In Cairo, thousands of humans swarmed over a nursery vessel like insects, their collective weight somehow collapsing a structure designed to withstand planetary bombardment. "The formula is perfect," Zorath whispered, more to himself than anyone else. 11,000 worlds. The axiom never fails. "It's failing now," Nalara stated flatly. "We fundamentally misunderstood something about their neurobiology." The view screen shifted to a feed from Moscow. A human female, blood streaming from countless wounds, scaled the exterior of a hovering nursery vessel. Her limbs should have given out from exhaustion and trauma, Yet she continued climbing, her face locked in an expression the Meveran emotional analysis software classified simultaneously as rage, determination, and love, a combination their systems flagged as contradictory. "Magnify," Zoreth ordered. The image zoomed in on the human's eyes. Within them burned something the commander had never seen in 8 centuries of conquests. A fire that transcended rational thought, a force that seemed to rewrite the fundamental laws of biological limitation. "What am I looking at?" he demanded. Nalara's skin paled. Their brains are producing a neurochemical cocktail, as scientists believed, theoretically impossible. It's overriding their pain receptors, supercharging their muscular systems, and enhancing neural transmissions. They're essentially writing their own biological code in real time. "That's not possible," Cavex protested. "And yet, we're watching it happen," Nalara replied. "The effect appears strongest in individuals directly related to captured offspring, but it's spreading through their population like a contagion. They call it the mama bear effect, or Papa Wolf response in their cultural lexicon." Zoreth watched as the Moscow feed showed the bloodied human reaching the vessel's access port, tearing it open with strength that defied physical laws, and disappearing inside. Seconds later, children began emerging from the opening, guided by the wounded woman. "The extraction protocols are failing across all continents," the ship's AI announced, its tone unchanged despite delivering catastrophic news. "Probability models are recalculating." A new alert flashed across the displays, a feed from the holding chambers within the Inevitable itself. The first wave of extracted human children had already been transported to the flagship. They were supposed to be undergoing the initial phase of memory suppression. Instead, the feed showed utter chaos. Security barriers had been breached, Meveran guards lay incapacitated, and moving through the corridors like unstoppable forces were human adults. Parents who had somehow tracked their children across impossible distances, breached supposedly impenetrable barriers, and overcome biological limitations to reach the fleet. "How did they get aboard?" Zoreth bellowed. They followed the extraction beams," Cavex stammered. "They physically entered the phase shift corridors. That's supposed to be impossible without protective technology." "Their bodies should have been atomized," Nalara whispered. "Tell that to them," Cavex replied, pointing at the screen where a human male, ordinary in every visible aspect, tore through a security door designed to withstand concentrated plasma fire. Mark Foster felt no pain. The phase shift had scorched his skin, scrambled his senses, and nearly stopped his heart. None of that mattered. Emma was here. He could feel it with a certainty that transcended rational thought. The alien corridor stretched before him, curved and disorienting. Creatures with multiple limbs and eyes scattered at his approach. Some tried to stop him. They failed. Mark had never been violent. He'd never served in the military, never trained in combat. He was an accountant who occasionally played weekend basketball, yet his body moved with terrifying efficiency, his mind processing threats with cold, mathematical precision. A door blocked his path. Seamless metal with no visible handle or control panel. Behind it, he knew with inexplicable certainty, was. He placed his hands against the smooth surface and pushed. The metal groaned. Tendons stood out on his neck and arms. Blood vessels burst in his eyes, turning them crimson. The door began to bend. "Emma," he whispered through gritted teeth. "Daddy's coming." On the command deck, Zoreth watched the human breach, a door that could withstand direct artillery fire. "This defies all physical laws," he said, voice hollow with disbelief. "Not their laws," Nalara replied, frantically analyzing data. "Commander, I've been reviewing their mythology, literature, historical accounts. This behavior is documented throughout their history. When their offspring are threatened, humans don't just fight back. They It's not metaphorical. They literally alter their biological functioning. No species can override its own biological limitations," Zoreth insisted. "These can," Nalara said. "And worse, the effect is spreading beyond biological parents. Their entire species is responding as if all their young are collectively their responsibility. It's a hive-like response in an individualistic species, a complete contradiction of evolutionary theory." The ship shuddered violently. Alarms blared across all decks. "They've reached the primary power coupling," Cavex reported, panic evident in his voice. How do they even know where it is? How do they understand our technology? They don't, Nilara whispered. They're not following logic or analysis. They're following something else. Something we have no algorithm to comprehend. Another violent tremor rocked the flagship. Emergency lighting activated as primary systems began failing. Evacuation protocol, Zorith ordered, his voice trembling for the first time in his long existence. All vessels. Immediate withdrawal. Sir, Cavex protested. The extracted subjects. Leave them. All vessels. Emergency translocation. Now. In the holding chamber, Emma Foster huddled with dozens of other children. The strange beings had taken them from their homes, spoken in voices that somehow made sense inside their heads, told them they would soon forget their families. Then the screaming had started. Not from the children, but from somewhere else in the massive ship. The aliens had panicked, their multiple eyes widening, their composed movements becoming erratic. "The parents are coming," one of the older boys whispered. Not a question, but a statement of absolute certainty. The massive door to the chamber buckled inward, metal shrieking as it tore from its frame. Through the opening stepped a man, blood streaming from his nose, his clothes torn, his eyes wild. "Emma," Mark Foster shouted. "Daddy?" Emma broke from the group, running to her father. As Mark swept his daughter into his arms, the other children watched in silent awe. Then, one by one, more adults appeared behind Mark. Mothers, fathers, some related to the children present, others just fighting for any child they could find. "We're going home," Mark said, not just to Emma but to all of them. All of us. Commander Zoreth had retreated to the emergency escape vessel, watching through the viewports as humans swarmed throughout his once invincible flagship. The inevitable, named for the mathematical certainty of Mevaran conquest, was falling to creatures who should have been conquered within hours. "The axiom has failed," he said, the words burning like poison in his mouth. Beside him, Nilara continued analyzing data even as their escape pod prepared for emergency translocation. "Not failed," she corrected. "The axiom was incomplete. We never encountered a species where protecting the young transcends all other biological imperatives, even survival itself. They should be dying by the thousands," Zoreth whispered. "Their bodies can't sustain what they're doing." "Some are dying," Nilara confirmed, checking her readings. "But they keep coming anyway. It's as if death is an acceptable cost." The escape pod shuddered as its engines engaged. Through the viewport, Zoreth watched as his magnificent flagship, the crowning achievement of Mevaran engineering, was overrun by primitives who had, in the span of hours, evolved from prey to predators. "What are they?" he asked, genuine existential fear in his voice. Nilara looked up from her data, her expression grave. "The universe's most terrifying organism, a species that weaponizes love." As the escape pod accelerated away from Earth, carrying the remnants of the once confident command crew, alarm signals continued to flood in from across the Mevaran fleet. The pattern was the same everywhere, parents finding their children, seemingly guided by an invisible force no Mevaran instrument could detect. The ship's AI spoke one final time before emergency protocols silenced it. Probability of successful conquest, 0%. Recommended course of action, never return. For the first time in 8,000 years of interstellar conquest, the Mevarans fled, leaving behind their advanced technology, their extracted subjects, and the shattered remains of their perfect, undefeatable strategy. And on Earth, the parents brought their children home. 5 years after what Earth now called the abduction day, humanity was no longer alone in the stars. The Mevaran escape vessels had fled to their nearest colonial outpost, but they had not traveled alone. Somehow, impossibly, they had been followed, not by military vessels. Earth had none capable of interstellar travel, but by parents, hundreds of them, piloting the very nursery vessels that had stolen their children, reverse-engineered through a combination of desperation, determination, and several scientific breakthroughs that should have taken decades. Commander Zoreth, once the most decorated conqueror in Mevaran history, now stood before the High Council of 14 galaxies, his once pristine exoskeleton bearing the scars of multiple escape attempts. Behind him, in the gallery of the vast chamber, representatives from all 11,000 previously conquered worlds watched with expressions ranging from terror to vindictive satisfaction. "The human advance continues unabated," Zoreth reported, his voice hollow. They have already liberated 37 of our colonial systems. Our planetary defense networks are useless against their improvised vessels. Our neural disruptors have no effect on their neurophysiology when their young are threatened. The Arch-Counselor's appendages trembled visibly. How long do we have? Zareth's secondary eyes closed in resignation. At current rates of expansion, extinction within 18 solar cycles. A horrified murmur rippled through the chamber. Extinction was not a concept the Minbarans had contemplated in 9 millennia of dominance. We have deployed our entire military reserve, the defense minister added, desperation evident in his rapid gestures. It has only accelerated our losses. They do not follow any recognizable rules of engagement. They simply keep coming. They cannot be reasoned with, asked a voice of reason, the Meveran equivalent of a diplomatic advisor. Science Officer Nelara stepped forward, now bearing the rank insignia of Chief Xenobiologist. We have attempted communication 73 times. They respond with a single demand: the immediate release of all subjugated young from all species across all Meveran territories. Impossible, the economic minister protested. Our entire civilization depends on the integrated labor of adopted young from conquered gods. Compliance would cause total societal collapse. Non-compliance ensures our extinction, Nelara countered. The chamber fell silent as the implications settled on the assembled leaders. The perfect mathematical formula that had built the greatest empire in known space had encountered its first unsolvable equation. There must be another variable, the Arch-Counselor finally whispered. Nelara, you have studied these humans most closely. What have we missed? Nalara's skin flushed with nervous indicators. There is one pattern I have observed, but it seems contradictory. Explain. The humans appear most aggressive when directly pursuing their own biological offspring. Yet strangely, once their individual young are recovered, they do not retreat. Instead, they expand their protective response to include all children, regardless of biological connection, even alien young. The council exchanged confused glances. That defies evolutionary logic, the genetic minister objected. Nevertheless, it is happening, Nelara insisted. And there's more. In the systems where they have already established control, they are not implementing extraction protocols against our populations. Instead, they are, she hesitated, searching for words. They are establishing what they call family reunification centers. They are returning Meveran young to their biological progenitors. Absolute silence fell across the chamber. For a species that had built an empire on the strategic separation of young from their birth parents, this concept was almost incomprehensible. Why would they do this? The Arch-Counselor asked. It provides no strategic advantage. I believe, Nelara said carefully, they are attempting to teach us something. On the human flagship, Parental Guidance, Admiral James Wilson sat across from his most unusual guest. The small Mevaran child, approximately equivalent to a human 6-year-old, played with building blocks on the conference room floor. Beside the child sat his recently reunited biological parent, still wearing restraints, but watching the child with an expression no human had ever seen on a Mevaran face before. You understand our terms? Wilson asked. The Mevaran parent, the concept still felt strange to Wilson, looked up with all 4 eyes. I understand, but my leaders will not. They cannot. Then your species faces extinction, Wilson stated flatly. We have already liberated 42 of your worlds. Your defenses are failing everywhere. Your young are being returned to their biological origins. The foundation of your empire is crumbling. This is not conquest, the Mevaran said quietly. What you are doing has no name in our language. In ours it's called parenting, Wilson replied. Something your civilization abandoned millennia ago. The small Mevaran child toddled over to its parent, reaching up with tiny appendages. After a moment's hesitation, the adult lifted the child into its lap, an act that would have been considered bizarre and primitive in traditional Mevaran society. Wilson watched the interaction carefully. Your neuroscans are changing, he observed. The same regions that activate in human parents are beginning to activate in you. It is uncomfortable, the Mevaran admitted. Yet, I cannot stop it. That's how it starts, Wilson said with a slight smile. The most powerful force in the universe, and your people tried to mathematically control it. Mark Foster entered the conference room, Emma now 11 years old, holding his hand tightly. The Mivarain flinched visibly at the sight of the man who had torn through multiple nursery vessels with his bare hands 5 years ago. "This is our proposal," Mark said without preamble. "You will release every child from every world you've conquered over the past 8,000 years. You will return them to their biological origins where possible, or to appropriate caregivers where not. You will dismantle your extraction technology. You will never again separate a child from its parents." The Mivaran's skin paled. "And in return, you get to survive," Wilson stated. "That is not a negotiation. That is surrender." Mark Foster took a step forward, and despite 5 years of peace, the Mevaran instinctively recoiled. The human who had bent metal with his hands, who had tracked his daughter across impossible distances, who had become the nightmare of an entire interstellar civilization, knelt down before the Mevaran child. "Hello there," he said gently. The universal translator conveyed his words in the musical tones of the Mevaran language. The child chirped a response, curious rather than afraid. "I have a daughter too," Mark continued, nodding toward Emma. "When your people took her, I would have destroyed 1,000 worlds to get her back." The Mevaran parent tightened its grip on the child slightly. "But that's not what makes us dangerous," Mark continued. "What makes us dangerous is that once we rescued our children, we couldn't stop. We looked at the children your people had taken from other worlds, and we saw our own. We couldn't leave them behind." He rose and faced the adult Mevaran. "That's our proposal, not just survival. Something better. We will teach your people how to be parents again." 3 months later, Commander Zorith stood before the High Council once more. The chamber was in disarray, with nearly half the council members absent, either fled to distant territories or participating in what humans called parental bonding therapy. "The humans have provided their final terms," Zorith announced. "Total dismantling of our conquest infrastructure. Return of all extracted young to their worlds of origin. Complete neural reprogramming of our educational system." "Capitulation," the Arch-Councillor spat. "Transformation," corrected Nilara, who now stood not as a subordinate, but as an equal to Zorith. "I have undergone the neural therapy. I have been reunited with my biological progeny. The experience is revealing." "You have been corrupted by their influence," the economic minister accused. "I have been awakened to a fundamental truth," Nilara replied calmly. "Our entire civilization is built on a mathematical error. We calculated that separating young from their biological origins would create perfect social compliance. Instead, we created an empire of profound emptiness, beings incapable of the very force that makes these humans so terrifyingly powerful." "Their barbaric attachment to their offspring?" the genetic minister sneered. "Their capacity for love," Nilara corrected. "Not just for their biological offspring, but for any child in need of protection. They call it adoption. The voluntary assumption of parental responsibility for young not of their genetic lineage. It is simultaneously their greatest weakness and their greatest strength." The council chamber doors swung open, and a human delegation entered. At their head walked Mark Foster, with Emma now by his side, not as a child to be protected, but as a young woman learning the ways of diplomacy. Behind them came parents from a dozen different species, each accompanied by their biological young families reunited after generations of separation. "We have reviewed your terms," the Arch-Councillor began formally. "They aren't terms," Mark interrupted. "They're an invitation." Emma stepped forward, her voice clear in the vast chamber. 5 years ago your people came to Earth believing you had perfected conquest. Today we offer you the chance to learn something we've understood since the beginning of our existence. Real strength doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from protecting those who cannot protect themselves. She gestured to the assembled families. "Every species in this room has the capacity for what you tried to breed out of existence. Your perfect strategy failed because you encountered a species that had fully embraced what you had abandoned, the willingness to fight, not just for our own children, but for all children." The Arch-Councillor's appendages trembled slightly. "And if we refuse?" Mark's expression hardened just enough to send a visible shudder through the Mivaran leaders. "Then you face a species willing to travel across galaxies not for conquest, resources, or power, but because we heard a child crying." In the silence that followed, a small Mevaran child broke free from its parent in the delegation, and toddled curiously toward the council platform. The assembled leaders recoiled as if from a dangerous animal, except Nilara. She knelt down, extending an appendage to the small being. "This is the true power in the universe," she said, looking up at her former leaders. "Not conquest, not extraction, connection." As the child chirped happily and climbed into her arms, Nilara faced the council with all four eyes gleaming with an emotion never before seen in their chambers. "We accept their offer," she declared, "not because we must survive, but because for the first Sci-Fi in 9,000 years we have the chance to truly live." The Mivoran Empire, the mathematical perfection that had conquered 11,000 worlds, crumbled not with violence, but with that simple act of connection. And across 14 galaxies, children began coming home,